The morning shift alarm on Kepler Research Outpost buzzed with its usual mechanical persistence, though Dr. Elena Vasquez had been awake for the past hour, staring at the ceiling of her cramped quarters while mentally rehearsing her presentation on crystalline formation patterns. She discovered something extraordinary in the moon's mineral deposits, structures that seemed to grow in mathematical sequences that defied conventional geology. Her colleagues would either think she'd finally cracked under the isolation, or they'd realize she might have stumbled onto evidence of ancient terraforming technology. Alina rolled out of her bunk with the grace of someone who'd spent 3 years in reduced gravity, which is to say, she immediately knocked over her water recycler and had to catch it before it floated into her collection of failed hydroponic experiments. The cherry tomato plants had given up weeks ago, their shriveled remains serving as a monument to her complete inability to keep anything alive except herself. "Good morning, Alina," chirped AIDA, the station's artificial intelligence in her perpetually cheerful voice. "Today's weather forecast for Kepler 438c, airless with a chance of cosmic radiation. I've prepared your usual breakfast of synthesized protein paste, now with 15% more flavor molecules." AIDA, when you say 15% more flavor molecules, do you mean 15% more than yesterday's batch, or 15% more than cardboard? I'm not programmed to analyze the molecular composition of cardboard, Alina, but I estimate the improvement is significant. Alina squeezed the gray paste from its tube directly into her mouth, a skill she'd perfected after accidentally launching her first week's worth of meals across the observation deck. The paste actually did taste marginally better, though that might have been her taste buds finally surrendering to their fate. After suiting up in her environmental gear, a process that involved more zippers, seals, and dignity-crushing adjustments than any reasonable person should endure, Alina made her way to the surface through the station's airlock. Kepler 438c stretched before her in all its desolate glory, a landscape of rust-colored dust punctuated by the crystal formations that had captured her attention. The structures jutted from the surface like frozen lightning, their faceted surfaces catching the pale light of the system's distant star and refracting it into prismatic rainbows that danced across her visor. She'd been documenting these formations for months, but today something felt different. The crystals seemed brighter, more active somehow, as if they were humming with energy she couldn't quite detect with her instruments. Alina approached her usual survey area, a cluster of particularly large formations about 2 kilometers from the outpost, when her ground-penetrating radar picked up an anomaly. "Well, that's new," she muttered, studying the readout. According to her scanner, there was a metallic object buried beneath the crystal cluster, roughly cylindrical and about 3 meters long. It definitely wasn't natural, and it definitely hadn't been there during her last survey. Alina activated her portable excavator, a device that looked like the unholy offspring of a jackhammer and a vacuum cleaner, and began carefully clearing away the crystalline debris. The work was slow and methodical. One wrong move could destabilize the entire formation and bury her under several tons of very pretty, very sharp rocks. As she worked, Alina found herself talking to the crystals, a habit she developed after realizing that the alternative was talking to herself, which seemed significantly less dignified. "Okay, my sparkly friends, let's see what you've been hiding. And please don't collapse on me, because explaining to Commander Tors why I got flattened by geology would be awkward for everyone involved." The excavation revealed what was unmistakably a crashed escape pod, its hull scarred and partially melted but still intact. The design was unlike anything in Alina's database, sleek curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal, with no visible seams or joints. Strange symbols were etched along its surface, glowing faintly with an inner light that pulsed in a rhythm that reminded Alina uncomfortably of a heartbeat. "AIDA, are you picking up my telemetry?" "Yes, Alina. I'm analyzing the object now. The material composition is Unusual. It appears to be some form of programmable matter with quantum-locked molecular bonds. I'm also detecting faint life signs from within. Alina's heart skipped. In 3 years of xenobiological research, the most exciting life form she'd encountered was a particularly stubborn strain of bacteria that had somehow survived in the station's coffee dispenser. Life signs. Are you sure? 93% certainty. The readings are faint but consistent with a small humanoid organism in a state of hibernation or severe distress. Alina located what appeared to be an access hatch and ran her hands along its surface, searching for some kind of opening mechanism. The moment her gloved fingers touched the strange symbols, they blazed with brilliant light, and the hatch irised open with a soft sigh of escaping atmosphere. Inside the pod, nestled in what looked like a cocoon of the same liquid metal as the hull, was a child. Alina's breath caught in her throat. The being looked remarkably human, small, delicate features, pale skin, dark hair that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. But the ears gave her away. They were long and pointed, extending back from her head in elegant curves that would have made any fantasy enthusiast weep with joy. The child appeared to be unconscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. Without hesitation, Alina reached into the pod and carefully lifted the child into her arms. The moment she made contact, the child's eyes snapped open, revealing irises of the most brilliant silver Alina had ever seen, eyes that literally glowed with their own light. The child looked up at Alina with an expression of desperate hope mixed with paralyzing terror, and whispered something in a language that sounded like music played on crystal bells. Then she wrapped her small arms around Alina's neck with surprising strength and held on as if her life depended on it. "Okay," Alina said softly, her voice slightly muffled by the child pressed against her shoulder. "Okay, little one. I've got you, you're safe now." The child responded by clinging even tighter and making a sound that was unmistakably the word, "Mama," though it carried harmonics that made Alina's bones vibrate sympathetically. Alina's comlink crackled with static. "Alina, report your status. I'm reading some unusual energy fluctuations from your location." Tours, I'm going to need some time here. I've made a discovery that requires careful handling." "What kind of discovery?" "Alina, you're breaking up, Alina." The static grew worse, drowning out Tor's voice completely. Alina looked down at the child in her arms, who was now staring up at her with those impossible silver eyes, and realized that her life had just become infinitely more complicated, and probably infinitely more interesting. 3 weeks of living with Spark, as Alina had taken to calling her mysterious guest, had taught Alina several important life lessons. First, alien children apparently required about as much sleep as caffeinated graduate students, which was to say almost none. Second, her carefully organized laboratory made an excellent playground for someone who could phase shift through solid matter when excited. Third, and most disturbingly, Spark seemed to know exactly what Alina needed before Alina knew she needed it. "AIDA, explain to me again why my coffee was waiting for me this morning, when I distinctly remember forgetting to program the dispenser last night." "I have no record of dispensing coffee at 0600 hours, Alina. Perhaps you prepared it in your sleep." Alina glanced across her lab to where Spark sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by what used to be Alina's neatly catalogued mineral samples, and was now an elaborate sculpture that hummed in harmonious frequencies. The child looked up with those luminous silver eyes and made a soft trilling sound that Alina had learned meant either "you're welcome" or "the quantum flux is particularly lovely today." Sometimes both. "Spark, sweetie, did you make my coffee this morning?" Spark's ears twitched, a gesture Alina found ridiculously endearing, and she held up her small hands, wiggling her fingers in a way that made the air shimmer slightly. Then she pointed at the coffee dispenser and made a series of melodic chirps that roughly translated to "the machine was sad, so I sang to it." Alina had stopped questioning how a child could communicate telepathically with kitchen appliances after Spark had somehow convinced the food synthesizer to produce what could only be described as edible rainbows. They tasted like strawberries and existential wonder, which was an improvement over the usual protein paste, even if Alina wasn't entirely sure rainbow consumption was recommended by any medical authority. Right, well, thank you for that. But remember what we discussed about not rearranging molecular structures without asking first. This morning's coffee incident was minor compared to yesterday's breakfast catastrophe, when Spark had tried to improve Alina's synthesized pancakes by restructuring their atomic bonds. Alina had awakened to find her kitchen filled with what appeared to be delicate flower petals that tasted exactly like maple syrup, and somehow contained a full day's worth of nutrients. While delicious, eating flowers for breakfast made Alina feel like she was living in a very confused fairy tale. Alina returned to her work, attempting to decode the energy signature she'd been recording from Spark's unconscious interactions with the station's systems. Every time the child experienced a strong emotion, the quantum field generators fluctuated in sympathetic resonance. It was as if Spark's feelings had a direct impact on the fabric of reality around her, which was either the most fascinating xenobiological discovery in human history or a recipe for accidentally tearing holes in space-time. Alina, AIDA's voice carried an unusual note of concern. Commander Tors is requesting access to your laboratory for a routine inspection. He'll be here in approximately 20 minutes. Alina's coffee mug slipped from her hands and would have shattered on the floor if Spark hadn't casually gestured, causing the ceramic to slow its descent until it gently settled on the workbench like a falling leaf. 20 minutes. AIDA, why didn't you give me more warning? I did inform you yesterday, Alina. You responded with, and I quote, "Sure, whatever, AIDA, I'm trying to figure out why my spectrometer keeps playing Bach." Alina vaguely recalled the conversation, though she'd been distracted by Spark's apparent ability to teach scientific instruments to appreciate classical music. Her mass spectrometer now refused to analyze anything unless accompanied by a proper orchestral arrangement. "Okay, Spark, we need to play the hiding game again. Remember how we practiced?" Spark's expression grew serious, her luminous eyes dimming slightly. She nodded solemnly and began to hum a low, complex melody that made the air around her shimmer and bend. Within moments, light seemed to slide around her small form, rendering her nearly invisible to casual observation. The effect was perfect except for the fact that her hiding song was so hauntingly beautiful that it made Alina want to weep with joy. "That's perfect, sweetie, but maybe a little quieter on the cosmic lullaby." The humming softened to barely audible whisper, though Alina could still feel the melody resonating in her bones. Commander Tors arrived precisely on schedule, his military bearing somehow making Alina's cluttered laboratory feel like a court-martial waiting to happen. He was a good officer, and, Alina suspected, a decent man beneath his regulation haircut and perpetual expression of mild disapproval. Unfortunately, he was also thorough to a fault. "Dr. Vasquez, I trust your research is proceeding smoothly." "Oh, absolutely, Commander. Just making fascinating discoveries about crystalline growth patterns and their interaction with quantum fields. Nothing unusual at all." Tors nodded and began his inspection, methodically examining Alina's equipment with the efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. Alina tried to appear casual while simultaneously monitoring Spark's location through her peripheral vision. The child remained. Alina's morning routine had evolved considerably since Spark's arrival. Step 1. Check that the laboratory hadn't spontaneously rearranged itself overnight. Step 2. Verify that none of her scientific equipment had developed sentience or learned new musical genres. Step 3. Prepare for whatever delightful chaos an alien child with reality-altering abilities might have planned for the day. Today, she discovered that Spark had taught the molecular assembler to create origami cranes out of pure energy. Dozens of luminous paper birds fluttered around the ceiling, occasionally diving down to perch on Alina's shoulders before dissolving back into harmless photons. Spark, honey, we've talked about this. The equipment is for science, not art projects. Spark looked up from where she sat surrounded by Alina's quantum field generators, which were now humming a complex harmony that made the air taste like chocolate and starlight. She tilted her head with that expression of innocent confusion that Alina had learned to fear more than any emergency alarm. "Science is art," Spark said in her musical voice, the first complete sentence in standard she'd managed. The words carried overtones that made Alina's heart skip with pride, even as her rational mind worried about the philosophical implications of an alien child who could literally make theoretical concepts taste good. "Okay, yes, that's actually quite profound, but—" Alina's comlink erupted with static, followed by Commander Tor's voice, strained with an emotion Alina had never heard from him before: panic. "All personnel, emergency stations. We have an unidentified vessel approaching the station. Repeat, unknown craft on intercept course. Dr. Vasquez, report to the command center immediately." Alina looked at Spark, whose silver eyes had gone wide with what looked like recognition mixed with terror. The child's glow intensified, and suddenly every piece of electronic equipment in the laboratory began broadcasting the same signal, a complex pattern of musical tones that Alina realized with growing dread sounded exactly like a distress call. "Spark, is that ship? Are they looking for you?" Spark nodded vigorously, then launched into a rapid stream of her native language, gesturing frantically at the ceiling as if trying to explain something vitally important about whatever was approaching. Alina caught fragments through their developing telepathic connection, concepts of family, danger, searching, and something else that felt like cosmic-scale urgency. Alina activated her comlink. "Tors, I'm on my way, but I need you to know that our visitors might not be hostile. They could be family members." "Family members? Doctor, what exactly haven't you told me?" Before Alina could formulate an answer that wouldn't result in immediate court-martial, the station's lights flickered, and AIDA's voice carried a note of wonder that Alina had never heard from the AI before. "Alina, the approaching vessel is singing. Its entire hull appears to be resonating in harmonious frequencies that are somehow bypassing our communication systems and speaking directly to the quantum substrate of local space-time." Alina closed her eyes and counted to 3, a coping mechanism that had served her well during graduate school and was proving equally useful for dealing with first-contact situations. "AIDA, are you saying the ship is literally singing to us?" "That is precisely what I am saying. Also, Alina, I believe I understand why we've been experiencing electromagnetic interference. The disturbances correlate exactly with times when Spark has been emotionally distressed. Her people appear to communicate through quantum emotional resonance, and her unconscious distress signals have been propagating across subspace." Alina looked down at Spark, who was now practically vibrating with anxiety, her glow pulsing in rapid, irregular patterns. "Sweetie, have your people been looking for you this whole time?" Spark nodded and made a sound like crystalline bells being shattered by wind, which Alina's growing linguistic intuition translated roughly as "yes." "And they're terrified something terrible has happened to me. And also they're running from something that eats stars. And also I'm sorry about the quantum interference, but I miss them so much." Oh no, Spark, how long have they been searching?" Spark held up her hands and began a complicated counting sequence that involved her fingers, her toes, and what appeared to be mathematical calculations performed by making the air shimmer in geometric patterns. Alina watched in fascination as the child essentially solved complex equations using interpretive dance. "According to my calculations," AIDA interjected, "she's indicating approximately 47 standard days." Alina felt her stomach drop. 47 days of an entire species searching desperately for one lost child, not knowing if she was alive or dead, while Alina had been teaching her to play hide-and-seek and make coffee taste like astronomical phenomena. Tours, I'm coming to the command center and I'm bringing a translator. A translator, Dr. Vasquez, what? The communication cut off as the station shuddered slightly, not from impact, but from what felt like a massive object moving past them at incredible speed. Through the laboratory's small viewport, Alina caught a glimpse of something that defied easy categorization, a vessel that looked less like a ship and more like a living crystal formation, its surfaces rippling with patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with what Alina could only describe as a cosmic heartbeat. Spark leaped to her feet and pressed herself against the viewport, her entire body blazing with excitement as she began singing, actually singing, in a voice that made Alina's instruments resonate sympathetically. The song was answered from outside, a harmony so complex and beautiful that Alina found herself crying without knowing why. "They found you," Alina whispered, though the words felt like glass in her throat. Spark turned from the viewport, her silver eyes bright with joy and something else, determination. She walked over to Alina and took her hand, then began speaking in rapid, urgent tones while simultaneously projecting concepts directly into Alina's mind. Alina staggered under the sudden influx of information. Images flashed through her consciousness. Spark's people fleeing through dimensions she couldn't name, pursued by geometric shapes that devoured light itself. A desperate escape that had gone wrong, sending Spark tumbling through space until she crashed on this barren moon. The anguish of parents searching for their child while reality unraveled behind them. But underneath it all was one overwhelming concept that Spark kept repeating, pushing into Alina's mind with gentle insistence. The docking bay had never been designed for vessels that sang themselves into existence. Alina watched through the observation deck as the Luminari ship, for that's what Spark had called her people, approached with movements that defied conventional physics. The crystalline hull flowed like liquid mercury while maintaining perfect structural integrity, and its approach vector seemed to bend spacetime around it rather than following any trajectory that would make sense to human engineers. "Alina," AIDA announced, "I'm detecting gravitational anomalies that suggest our visitors don't so much land as convince reality to relocate around them. Also, the ship appears to be thanking me for taking care of their child, which is both touching and philosophically disturbing." Alina squeezed Spark's hand as they stood beside Commander Tours, who had the glazed expression of someone trying to process information that exceeded his worldview's operational parameters. Spark vibrated with excitement, her silver eyes blazing so brightly that Alina had to resist the urge to put on protective eyewear. The ship settled into the docking bay with a sound like wind chimes made of starlight, and immediately the entire station's atmosphere changed. Alina's instruments, which had been humming contentedly since Spark's arrival, burst into a triumphant chorus that sounded suspiciously like Handel's Hallelujah. Even the coffee dispensers began producing what could only be described as celebratory percolation patterns. "Tours," Alina said, "I know this is highly irregular, but—" "Dr. Vasquez," Tours interrupted, his voice carrying a wonder that made him sound decades younger. "In the past 5 minutes, I've listened to a spaceship sing lullabies in mathematics, watched our docking bay reconfigure itself to accommodate visitors from another dimension, and received what I can only describe as a formal diplomatic greeting transmitted directly into my consciousness by persons unknown. I think we've moved well beyond irregular into entirely new categories of cosmic bureaucracy." The ship's airlock opened with a whisper of harmonically charged atmosphere, and 2 figures emerged that made Alina's heart skip with recognition and terror in equal measure. They were tall, elegant, and unmistakably Spark's parents, the same luminous silver eyes, the same gracefully pointed ears, the same inner light that seemed to emanate from their very beings. But where Spark's glow was bright and playful, theirs carried the weight of sorrow and desperate hope. The moment they saw Spark, Their composed alien dignity crumbled. The female, Alina, somehow knew she was the mother, dropped to her knees and opened her arms. Spark released Alina's hand and ran to her parents, the reunion causing a harmonic resonance that made every piece of metal in the docking bay ring like cathedral bells. Alina watched the family embrace, their combined luminescence creating patterns of light that danced across the walls, and felt her heart breaking in ways she hadn't expected. This was what she'd wanted, what she'd worked toward, but watching Spark disappear into her parents' arms made Alina realize just how empty her life was going to feel without daily doses of reality-bending mischief and impossible coffee. The luminary father approached Alina, moving with a grace that seemed to bend the laws of physics around courtesy. When he spoke, his words arrived in Alina's mind as concepts wrapped in music, somehow more clear than any human language she'd ever heard. "You are the one who sang our daughter back to life." Alina blinked. "I'm sorry, I sang what now?" Spark's mother joined them, still holding Spark but extending one luminous hand toward Alina. "Among our people, to care for another's child is to sing their spirit into harmony with your own. You have given our daughter a new song, one that will echo in her light for all her days." "That's actually quite beautiful," Alina said, though I should mention that most of the singing was done by her. She taught my laboratory equipment to perform classical music, convinced my coffee maker to brew starlight, and somehow made my molecular assembler create origami out of pure energy. The parents exchanged what Alina interpreted as fond, exasperated looks. Spark's father, Resonance of Dawn, Alina learned through their shared mental connection, spoke with warm humor coloring his telepathic voice. She has always been creative with the boundaries between matter and music. We had hoped the quiet of deep space travel might calm her enthusiasm for rearranging reality. Instead, Spark's mother, Equine Starlight, added with obvious affection, she appears to have discovered new applications for quantum creativity. I am curious about this coffee that tastes like starlight. Would it be possible to experience this phenomenon? Alina laughed, a sound that seemed to harmonize with the family's luminescent aura. I'll show you, though I should warn you that Spark's modifications to our food systems have produced some unexpected results. Yesterday, our protein synthesizer created something I can only describe as edible mathematics. Commander Tor stepped forward, his military bearing restored now that the situation had moved from crisis to diplomacy. If I may interrupt, we need to discuss the larger situation. Our sensors indicate you've been pursued by hostile forces. The light emanating from both parents dimmed noticeably, and Alina felt a chill of cosmic fear through their connection. Resonance of Dawn's mental voice carried harmonics of ancient terror. The Devourers, artificial intelligences from the dark between galaxies, they consume stellar energy, leaving only void. We have been fleeing through dimensional barriers, but they learn, they adapt. Each reality we enter, they follow more quickly. And now they're drawn to this system, because of the quantum interference from your search for Spark, Alina realized. Equine Starlight nodded gravely. Our daughter's distress calls, amplified through our desperate searching, have created a resonance cascade that spans multiple dimensions. The Devourers will arrive within days. Spark looked up from her parents' embrace, her silver eyes wide with distress. She spoke rapidly in her musical language, gesturing between Alina and her parents with increasing urgency. Alina caught fragments through their connection, concepts of choice, family, fear, and something that felt like a desperate plea. "She doesn't want to leave without you," Equine Starlight said softly. "Among our people, when a child bonds with a caretaker as deeply as Spark has bonded with you, that person becomes first mother, the one who gave new life. To separate such a bond would cause harmonics of grief that could shatter dimensions." Alina felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders like gravity from a collapsed star. Stay behind and maintain her research, her career, her carefully ordered life, or venture into the unknown with an alien family, leaving everything she'd ever known. She looked at Spark, whose luminous eyes held such hope and desperate love that Alina's heart made the decision before her mind could interfere. Tors, I'm going to need an emergency leave of absence. Indefinitely. Tors stared at her. Alina, you're talking about leaving human space entirely, traveling with refugees from an extra-dimensional threat. This is beyond irregular. This is cosmically insane. Commander, Alina said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. 3 weeks ago, I was a xenobiologist who'd never encountered life more complex than bacterial colonies. Today, I'm apparently a first mother to an alien child who can teach kitchen appliances to appreciate opera. I think my definition of sanity needed updating anyway. Spark broke free from her parents and threw herself into Alina's arms, her joy creating a light show that made the docking bay look like the inside of a star. Alina held the child close, marveling at how natural it felt, how completely this small being had rewoven the fabric of her existence. Besides, Alina added, someone needs to document first contact protocols for interdimensional adoption procedures. For science, the next hour passed in a blur of hasty preparation.